This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
All right, Steve Laffey here. Slight technical difficulty to start here where I had to click her upside down to play the clips and it wouldn't go in the right direction. Okay, Steve. Not a high-tech guy, I am, but Steve Laffey, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. I think we have a great show for you today. I hope it is. And follow us on LaffeyRadio.com. Ariel Sharon passed away less than a week ago. And Ariel Sharon, for all intents and purposes, is Israel. Was Israel. Was what Israel was until the Gaza Strip, when he made that fateful decision to get out of the Gaza Strip in 2005. But I think if we take a look at Ariel Sharon's life, we can take a look at Israel. And I hope, that we can understand a little bit better what the people in Israel go through. When we view this from America, and since I was a kid, I've been, Israel's been in the news. 67 war, I guess, was my first. I must have been 5 years old. 73 war, I don't go back farther than that. I was born in 62. But, we take for granted sometimes when we look through America's eyes and we look at other countries, we don't necessarily think that they're in a totally different position. Our geography, and geography determines a lot about where countries are, how they do. How blessed we are with these two oceans on each side, and the acquisition of Alaska, not to get off on topic here, but having such great neighbors to our north. We love these Canadians, right? When was the last time a Canadian caused an American problem? On a lumber trade? I don't even know. They're just great. And they got Mexico to our south, and they have a lot of problems. And we have a lot of problems with them on immigration and so forth, and the Border Patrol and so forth. But they're still good neighbors, and the people, leaders of those countries, respect and like Americans as far as what we can do. Israel, to go back, before 1948, before the formation of Israel in 1948, and think about what happened to Jewish people. We can't, we try. I've been down to the museums. With 6 million of them, the Jewish people almost exterminated. As close as they could come, as Hitler could come. And so it wasn't even then, that even during World War II, that people they weren't even allowed to go to Israel. And it wasn't all the time back in the early 1900s that everybody thought that the Jews had to have a homeland or a state. But it was true, and from 45 on until May 14th, I think, 1948, when the state was created. But think about then. It must have been about 600,000 Jewish people. There were many more foreigners. The Palestinians at the time, whoever we want to call the Palestinians, a whole other argument, the ones who came back to attack, thought they could wipe them off the face of the earth. And in 1948, over that, 8-10 month period, Israel was able to save itself, conquer more land, and, of course, then the surrounding countries of Jordan, Syria, Egypt, the attacking countries, including Iraq, who never signed a treaty afterwards, as I remember. A couple of countries didn't sign a treaty. They didn't take in those people. So those people had no place to go. They had attacked Israel. Where are they going to live in the middle of Jerusalem? So they had lost 60% basically of the land that the partition that was drawn up. And so from that moment of the war of independence, we'll call it, what Israel calls it, it's a whole different mindset. It's one that I'm going to try to understand with you today so we can understand Israel and where they come from. But we never really will. But Ariel Sharon did. So let's take a look at Ariel Sharon for a second. And maybe it's best to start with a longer clip of Ariel Sharon's life. There's a longer clip I wanted to play. It's probably better to play at the beginning. We'll play it now, go through Ariel Sharon's life, and then we'll step back and take it piece by piece right through the Gaza Strip, and then see where we are today with Israel. And hope and pray that another Ariel Sharon, and there won't be another Ariel Sharon. There won't be a guy who grew up in the desert out there, who at 18, 19 was fighting and continued to fight for 30, 40 years in just about every battle we talk about. It doesn't matter the war of independence. It doesn't matter whether it's Unit 101 in the 50s, where they had to go back across borders and retaliate against the Palestinians coming across and the Jordanians coming across and kill them if they killed us and capture them if they captured us and so forth. And we'll tell some great stories about that. Or the 67 war, or the 56 sort of war, which Sharon was involved in, the Suez Canal closing. The 73 war, the surprise attack that came in the holiest days for the Jews. Lebanon, invasion of Lebanon in 82, which Sharon effectively gets banned, and then he comes back as prime minister. His walk to the Temple Mount, and in 2000, 2001. But let's play Ariel Sharon. We'll come back because we have to understand where we are today, and that's what the conclusion of the show was. Where are we today? And we're not in a very good place. Let me see if I can play this.
He was one of his nation's most controversial figures, a ferocious military strategist and hard-nosed politician, whose life and career spanned Israel's entire 65-year history. At just 20, Ariel Sharon shone as a platoon commander during Israel's 1948 War of Independence and launched his meteoric but at times contentious military career. In the years after independence, he earned the enmity of Palestinians and Arabs by leading a special army commando unit, Unit 101, in sometimes brutal reprisal attacks against Palestinian resistance fighters and civilians. In 1953, Unit 101 responded to the killing of 3 Israeli civilians with a revenge attack on the West Bank town of Kibbutz, leaving 69 Palestinians dead, including many women and children. Kibbutz was to be a lesson, he wrote years later in his autobiography. I was to inflict as many casualties as I could on the Arab Home Guard. I was to blow up every major building in the town. His tough, at times defiant streak showed during the 1956 Suez War, when, against orders, he sent his forces across the Mitla Pass in the Sinai Peninsula. Egyptian soldiers ambushed and killed dozens of his Israeli troops, forcing them to retreat. But in the 1967 Six-Day War, Sharon was hailed as a hero when, as commander of a powerful armored division in the Sinai, he captured the entire peninsula from the Egyptian army. He played an important part in the decisive victory that left Israel in control of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and Sinai. Sharon was once again lauded for his role as a brigadier general in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when he responded to Egypt and Syria's surprise attack with a counterattack that cut off the Egyptian army in Sinai. It marked a turning point in the war. After retiring from the army, Sharon plunged into more than 3 decades in politics as a leading figure in right-wing Israeli parties. As legislator, a prime minister's aide, and head of different cabinet ministries, Sharon promoted a hard line on security issues. Above all, he championed the establishment of Jewish settlements in the occupied territories, following a rationale he would later describe as, everything we take now will stay ours. Everything we don't grab will go to them. His most controversial cabinet tenure came as defense minister, beginning in 1981. The following year, after the shelling of northern Israel by the Palestine Liberation Organization in Lebanon, Sharon unleashed an invasion of Israel's northern neighbor. The PLO was driven from Lebanon, but thousands of Israelis and Palestinians died. Many hundreds of Palestinians slaughtered during a massacre at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps by Lebanese Christian militiamen. An investigative commission later found the Israeli military indirectly responsible and faulted Sharon personally for not taking appropriate measures to prevent bloodshed. He was dismissed from the defense ministry. But Sharon went on to other cabinet posts, including the critical housing minister's job in the early 90s, overseeing a rapid expansion of Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. He opposed the 1993 Oslo Peace Accords, and in 1998 he declared,
Israel is against having a Palestinian state. And the government, as a matter of all the government, were against having a Palestinian state here. because of the dangers.
In 1999, Sharon was elected leader of the rightist Likud party. A year later, during his campaign for prime minister, he made a provocative visit to Jerusalem's Temple Mount, home to the holiest site to Jews and the third most revered by Muslims. Shortly afterwards, the second Palestinian uprising, or Intifada, began. Later in New York, Sharon defended the Temple Mount visit.
The Temple Mount is the holiest place of the Jewish people. I hope I'll be doing that in the future as well. No restrictions. We live in a free country. Everyone can go within the sovereign area of Israel everywhere.
Sharon had won that election, defeating Ehud Barak to become prime minister in the spring of 2001.
Ariel Sharon.
I, Ariel Sharon, swear as Prime Minister to be honest and uphold the rules of the State of Israel.
Reacting to an upsurge in suicide bombings by Palestinians against Israel, he launched the building of the controversial security barrier to separate the two. But in 2005, in a surprise turnaround, Sharon announced a unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, dismantling Israeli settlements and forcing their inhabitants to leave. The move infuriated many in his conservative constituency, and later that year he quit Likud to form a new centrist Kadima party. Sharon was widely expected to win another term as prime minister, but two strokes, a mild one in December 2005 and a second massive brain hemorrhage 2 weeks later, put an abrupt end to his political life. Since then, Sharon remained in a coma at a long-term care facility near Tel Aviv. Over the years, his family reported occasional eye and finger movement, but the lifelong warrior never fully regained consciousness. At his death, Ariel Sharon was 85 years old.
Well, that's about everything you can think of right up to 2005 until I think it was January 2006 when he suffered. He had a small stroke in December 2005 and had a massive stroke in 2006 and basically was on life support until last week where he finally passed away. Let's go back to 1948. I was just running through some numbers so we could all understand what Israel was like at the very infancy. It seems like there were about 600,000 people, Jewish people, as they get attacked by all the surrounding, I guess almost all the surrounding countries. I think maybe Lebanon didn't. But so they're attacked. Luckily for them, it's always been that the Arabs cannot get along with each other. They can't unify. And so Ariel Sharon is about 18, 19, 20 years old. And here's what he's doing. He's basically a platoon guy. And he's in this battle, Operation Bin Nun, trying to capture a platoon police compound held by the Jordanian Arab Legion. His platoon's in the back. He leads his platoon to the battlefield. I go on. He's hit. Chaos. It's absolute chaos, and people are dying. He's trying to get out. He's trying to encourage soldiers. At one point, he's picking up a soldier and carrying him out. After a while, it says Sharon himself collapses. He's lying on his back. He's bleeding. He's moaning. He's about to faint. One of the other soldiers, Bugin, finds him. Sharon says to leave him alone and run for his life. Bugin ignores it and thereby changes Israeli history. And he carries him and so forth, and they drags him down. It's unbelievable. They finally find an armored vehicle and they're saved. He's hospitalized. I guess the bullet went through as I read about this, his bullet went through his stomach and came out his leg, but didn't hit any vital organs. And this is what happened throughout the war. He recovered. He recovers. He just goes right back to his patrol. And he breaks to an Egyptian stronghold and so forth, and he fights the whole time. Part I want to make about this is that to analyze Israel and to analyze Ariel Sharon, who really represents how Israelis thought through this whole time. It was defend Israel, fight, fight, fight. You can't trust anybody. Your friends are being killed. Literally at that time, when we take it back to tape, what would America have had? How many troops would America have had involved in a war to be comparable to what Israel was doing when they started with 600,000 people? It would have been 50 million people. So 50 million Americans would have been fighting for their lives, which has never happened. In active battlefields, out of the 300 million plus people we have today. So think about that when we think about the criticism labeled on Sharon all the time, it usually came about later from people who, and this is the generational thing, this is how we can compare it to America and to life in general. When things get a little bit easier, people forget the past. They just forget how tough it was and where people came from and how we got here. It's a generational thing that goes on all the time. Later on, I'm blowing right through. Let's take a quick break. It's Steve Laffey. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll take a quick break at Laffey Ready. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty 5. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest. I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better, and kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor, because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
The security of his people was always Eric's unwavering mission, a non-breakable commitment to the future of Jews, whether 30 years or 300 years from now. But there were times when he acted, and those actions earned him controversy and even condemnation. And in certain instances, American leaders, American presidents had profound differences with him. And they were never shy about stating them, nor was he ever shy about stating his position.
Steve Laffey's Fixing America. If I keel over today, please don't invite Joe Biden to my funeral. That was Vice President Joe Biden at Ariel Sharon's burial. And by the way, just to talk about what happened at Ariel Sharon's funeral, several miles away, I was reading at the same time, out of the Gaza Strip, the land that he unfortunately made, in my opinion, a giant mistake in giving up. Because I think he forgot as generations went by that your geography is very important. And for Israel, you need as much land as you can get to keep people from coming after you and give yourself time, whether it's missiles in the air, troops on the ground. I think he forgot that lesson in the Gaza Strip. But When Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, to be respectful, says that he earned his condemnation, he's saying earned, I mean he deserved it. So he's at a guy's funeral. And this is, by the way, how the U.S. acts toward Israel today. This is how the President of the United States treats Israel and treats Benjamin Netanyahu, has treated him ever since he's been president, by not going to Israel. Instead, he went to Egypt and gave a speech about, not to get into the speech, it was a terrible speech, and much of it, not that speech itself, but what has led to, if you just take a look at a map today and make Israel the center of it and look around. Take one about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, or take one just before Barack Obama came into office. And then look at the Sudan, look left, look Sudan, look Egypt, look Libya. Think Benghazi. Look up, right? Look to Lebanon, look to Syria, look to Iraq. I guess Jordan is not much of a change. Look to the left, down a little bit less, going lower. Look at Egypt. It's a total disaster. But not to get off track about Ariel Sharon, because we want to talk about more about Ariel Sharon, because I think understanding Israel and where they came from and where they are is the trick to understanding where we are and what we need to do. Because back in Ariel Sharon's day, I mean, when you read through the biographical life of Ariel Sharon, and I'll do a little bit right now, you'll see that often the words come out contrary to what his commanders thought he was going to do. Not that he was totally once and every day disobeying orders, but for example, this is now becomes we talked about the War of Independence. We talk about Ariel Sharon being shot. Now he's in his mid-20s. It's 50, 52, 53. And you've got what they call the Retribution Acts. At that point, the Arabs had not united again like they would against Israel. But they're coming over in the evening. They're killing Israelis. They're killing their animals. And so Sharon is still in the military. And his commanding officer, or a commanding officer, says to him, and the way the history goes, it says to him, hey, we've got to get together and find a way to go back over and get some of these people and capture so-and-so and get and show retribution. Otherwise, they're going to keep doing this. So it's an eye for an eye thing. Well, without a direct order from that meeting, Ariel Sharon, a man of action, just directly goes and finds like 7 guys, gets them their guns, goes across the river, captures who he's supposed to capture, brings them back, and leaves a message to the commanding officer, those guys are in the guardhouse. And that started this whole process that he was not totally in charge of. But the mindset, again, back then, was that we are surrounded. They want us all dead. And they still do. But that's how he lived his life every day, every night. So fast forward, we can go through, page after page. There's the Sinai War. That's 1956. Where's Ariel Sharon? He's in the 202nd Paratroopers Brigade. He's in charge of it. And so this is not to go into the Nasser and so forth, and you have to renationalize the Suez Canal. They don't know what to do. It's 56. No one knows really what to do. And so here is Ariel Sharon again fighting. He goes behind the lines again, and in many parts, and I won't go through the whole thing with you, but Sharon sends reinforcements across the line. And for several hours, they went patrol convoys. But he is actively part of this battle, too. So the years keep going on and on. And there's this one guy. I mean, this is longer than George Washington. Well, maybe not. George Washington, from 55 to as being president. You're talking about 30-some-odd years. For Ariel Sharon in a country that started with, a lot less area. But he's sort of the dominant figure. And all he thinks about, in fact, I'll read you a quote later on taken when Elliot Abrams, who was down in the early 2000s when he worked for George Bush. Here's Ariel Sharon's words, according to the notes of Elliot Abrams, about how he viewed his life in the state of Israel. Quote, I took risks personally, but never took any risks with the security of the state of Israel. I appreciate Arab promises, but will take seriously only tangible performance. For tangible performance, I will take tangible steps. Israel is a tiny, small country. From the Jordan River to Jerusalem, it's only 17 miles. From before 67, the Knesset was in range of machine guns south of Jerusalem. From the Green Line to Tel Aviv is 11 miles. From the Sea of Netanyahu to Tulkarm is 9 miles. 2/3 of Jewish population lives in a narrow strip on a coastal plain. Between Haifa and Ashdod, which is 80 miles, 2/3 of the Jewish population. Our only international airport and most of the infrastructure. All that is overlooked by the hills of Judea and Samaria. I am a Jew above all and feel the responsibility to the future of the Jewish people on my shoulders. After what happened in the past, I will not let the future of the Jewish people depend on anyone, even our closest friends. And I'll get back to that. Especially when you saw the crowds cheering Saddam, who killed even members of his own family and government. With the deepest friendship and appreciation, we do not choose to be the lamb, but not the lion either. I will not sacrifice the nation. I come from a farm family who settled here, but I deal with these problems with a cold mind. I met with the Pope, who said this is terra sancta, but terra promissa for Jews only. And he adds in, I'm going to defend the Palestinians. I've known the Palestinians my whole life. I was raised with them here. Of all the Arabs, the Palestinians are the most talented and they have the best sense of humor. But there are two problems: the desire to murder and their taste for Jewish blood, and their treacherous ingratitude. And that's his own words of how he felt. And I think what's happened since then, and we'll keep going through the history, up to the 67, 73 wars, but I think what's happened since Ariel Sharon, and maybe part of what happened in the 2000s and on, lots of Tel Aviv, in fact, lots of Israel does very well. And a different mentality takes hold sometimes. Into what people think, and even in Israel, and in Tel Aviv, for example, where people live for the day. In fact, let me play this one clip here. This is 60 Minutes talking about Tel Aviv and how it's viewed today, which it wouldn't have been 30 years ago. And I think people are looking, in large part, they look now without the same mentality that is needed to defend Israel. They look to what's America going to think. Well, in Ariel Sharon's words, he was going to do what he had to do and tell America about it along the way, because they're the greatest allies, and we are, even to this very day, I hope. But he was going to do what he had to do. But listen to 60 Minutes talk about Tel Aviv today to see a changing mindset from what Ariel Sharon is thinking.
We went looking for a place of calm in the Middle East, a place not racked by violence, anxiety, torment. Not an easy mission these days, but we found one in the unlikeliest of spots. Israel's largest city, Tel Aviv, bordered on all sides by danger. Tel Aviv has been through rough times over the decades: bloodshed, bombings, Scud missile attacks. Revolutions, civil wars, Islamic extremists are just a few hours' drive away in every direction. And if Iran ever builds that bomb, Tel Aviv will be well within range. So anything could happen anytime. But somehow, Tel Avivians have learned how not to worry about tomorrow. For them, the only time is now.
And it's not saying that is not a mindset that wouldn't enter anybody's mind. If you're a second generation, third generation Israeli, and you haven't lived the life of Ariel Sharon, it happens to all of us. But it's a worry that Israel, and I've seen this back since I've been really looking at it in my adult, last, say, the 2000s. And when I was running for the U.S. Senate in 2006, and the eruptions began again. And I kept thinking, why don't they just complete the job? And I'm wondering if, this is after Ariel Sharon in 2006 had a stroke, I'm wondering if the mindset has changed. And the mindset makes it more dangerous for Israel than less dangerous than it was years ago, even though it seems much more peaceful. Anyway, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're at Laffey Radio, by the way, and like us on Facebook, Laffey Radio at Facebook. We're on Twitter at Laffey Radio. We're broadcasting here every day from Fort Collins, and we're talking about the serious issues of our time. And today we're talking about Israel as seen through the life of Ariel Sharon. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army Strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared.
It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs.
I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Iron Dome is a technological marvel, a cutting-edge weapon of war that even some pacifists might come to love. Instead of killing people, Iron Dome saves them by intercepting rockets loaded with explosives before they can land on innocent civilians. And it does all this in less time than we've just spent explaining it. The system was developed by Israel with hundreds of millions of dollars of support from U.S. taxpayers. It's been called a game changer that might relieve military pressure on Israel and make it easier to achieve peace in the Middle East. And that was something we decided we had to see for ourselves.
Hey. Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Sometimes reporters don't know what they're saying. I mean, that man just described Reagan's Star Wars defense called the Iron Dome. Not the same exact thing. You know, we have 3 layers in America, what we do. None of them may work against the new Chinese missiles that they're developing, and no one seems to know about, which is, we'll have to do that show next week here at Laffey Radio. I appreciate you tuning in. It's a story of Israel as seen through Ariel Sharon, and by him missing what's maybe missing in Israel. But that report about the Iron Dome, by the way, literally 3 hours ago, the Iron Dome just shot down 5 missiles that came out of the Gaza Strip, and which is what Israel gave up back in 2005 under Ariel Sharon. But to backtrack a little bit, we've gone through part of his life, and we have to talk about the next big thing, I guess, which is the '67 war. And so here's the '67 war. Again, it's the people of Israel surrounded by their enemies, and Russia, Soviet Union at the time, doesn't matter where. It doesn't look like it's matter. It's Stalin or Putin. They're still doing the same. They're doing the same thing in Syria today with the missiles that they're trying to get over to Syria to disrupt anything to do with Israel and the United States. That's Russia's mission. But even back then, they were doing the same thing. They kind of convinced Egypt that Israel was going to attack them. And so here's Ariel Sharon. And again, if they had if they had attacked first, maybe Israel would have lost. So NASA closes down the Straits of Tiran, which if you don't know where they are, get out a map again and start heading up north. We'd look in Egypt on the sea and from the Gulf, and look at Egypt to your left and Saudi Arabia to your right, and that's the Straits of Tiran. So they close it to shipping for Israelis. So they're going to starve them out, I guess. And so Sharon says, even in '67, he writes, "For me, the most difficult thing was the loss of confidence. We, the commanders in the field, had plenty of confidence. We trained the forces well. There was an atmosphere of fear and anxiety in the public. And what bothered me and bothers me ever since is how a nation with such military might can suddenly lose confidence about its ability to fight back and win when war becomes inevitable. I didn't know where this lack of confidence came." And he goes on. It was very clear that we could strike Egypt, and he pushed. He pushed to strike Egypt. He was the strongest one to attack first. He knew they now had, it wasn't 48 anymore. It wasn't what he was doing in 53. He knew that those planes were hitting them. It would put them at a disadvantage. And so they hit first. And boom, in 6 days, they ran through this whole attack. And then basically the Palestinians and Egypt sat around and said, what do we do next? And what do they do next? Well, that goes to 1973, the Yom Kippur War. And that's the one where they did get the jump on Israel. And not to go into the whole thing, because we're not gonna make it through any of the stuff really, but he is the guy who engineered. So this is the same guy. It's like one guy. There's like one guy in Israel that you can talk about in every one of these things. So he's surprised, by the way. He's back in the reserves, and so he has an emergency plan for just this, Sharon. He's thought this all through. In fact, it's said that when you go to Sharon and you fly in a helicopter with him, when you did, that he knew the land so well. He traversed it by helicopter and tanks. He's a paratrooper, all this kind of stuff, that he could look down in a helicopter and say, and knew every little ridge. And so he knew it better than anybody. And finally, so he goes around in his tanks and has one of the greatest victory. He writes, we must remember that the victory in the Yom Kippur War is the greatest victory we've ever had. And if albeit omissions and mistakes, failures and failings, and loss of composure and self-control, we've achieved our victory. And, of course, he's very popular with his soldiers. He's actually involved in the fight. He's actually in the tanks. He's not a guy sitting around. He's a one-man wrecking crew. What was his nickname? The Bull? I mean, anyway, it goes on. So he wins. So he is one of the guys who wins the 73 war. So the mentality we have to understand is that now he's been doing this now by 73. Let's go to the Israeli attack on the nuclear plant. Who's behind it? Who's the guy urging it? And he doesn't know if he's the first guy to say it, to take out the Iraqi nuclear plant in 81. It's Sharon. It's Ariel Sharon, because he's going to strike first, can ask questions later. Today, the same type of leadership would have taken out, no matter what the cost, the Iranian nuclear reactors 5 years ago, 6 years ago. We know, for example, that Saudi Arabia would bless it, one of their arch enemies in many respects. Not the ones who attack them, but the Saudi Arabian, when we got the WikiLeaks information. The head of the snake is Iran, according to Saudi Arabia. Forget the Shia-Sunni thing for a second. But the thought process, in my book, is if Ariel Sharon was a young man, they would have taken that out too, even if it meant losing the soldiers along the way. But since they hadn't, and the mentality now in Israel is much more, and this is just a normal, rational thing when you've been around for a couple of 3-4 generations. They are much more concerned with whether the U.S. will let them. In fact, some people I know who go to Israel said that their people over there are afraid that the American planes would shoot down the Israeli planes now. And so there's a different mentality. And I don't know if we long for, but the mentality of Ariel Sharon, which again, he made several big mistakes, but they took out the plant. Now, he didn't fly the mission, but when you read through the history of it again, where's Ariel Sharon? He is right there. He was a member of the small cabinet, the real inside cabinet, and he was behind that. Then the Lebanon War comes along, and it's Ariel Sharon again. They've got to move up north. They've got to go into Beirut. Tragedies happen. In fact, they don't get what they really want out of it. What they really want was to install the Christian government, run by the Christians, so they could have a buttress to their north. And of course, what happened on September 14th, 1982, Gamaliel was killed in a tremendous blast that destroyed the headquarters of the Christian militias, militias, and 3 weeks after he was elected president. And so that was it. Their dream to have a pro-Israeli government in Lebanon was shattered. They lost. Doesn't mean they should have fought. And then you have the whole situation with the Christian militia that entered Sabra and Shatila, which we heard a little clip on, and massacred how many people we don't know, but between hundreds and thousands of Muslims. And they should have been protected. There should have been some more foresight in this. And that's when Sharon goes into Never Never Land and leaves. But the other thing to go through, and this is something that never is talked about in American politics today. After the 73 war, the Arab countries, the Palestinians, they realize, remember, Israel's getting stronger military. They have a great fighting force now. Their planes, they've tried 3 times, in 48, in 67, and 73, and they've lost. And all they've lost is more land. And then they get together in Cairo in 1974, and they come up with their phased plan. And I will tell you this, there is not very many Americans on the street of America or people who are interested in politics who know anything about the phase plan. Phase plan is simply this. They decide that they're going to take them out one step at a time. Not going to be able to take them out. They agree in a meeting that we're not going to be able to take them out all at once. So we're going to take them out no matter how long it takes, no matter what we have to do, we will take them out one step at a time if it takes 100 years. And all I could find today in talking about the phase plan, this is Yasser Arafat and his friends, all I could find out is that there are some people who wonder if it's still in effect. It's obviously still in effect. It's in effect in Iran. It's in effect. All these countries want Israel to disappear. And that's simply not going to change. And so it's how do you fight that? How do you have a plan today to fight that? Well, you have to be like Ariel Sharon. You have to have people in that country have to have that mentality. Every day they wake up in that little country. And then some people say, I said to me when I ran for the Senate, why are you such a great defender of Israel? I said, can you get out a map? Get out a map. Take a look at it. Who would we be friends with? Who would we associate ourselves with? Why would we forget the past of what happened in Nazi Germany? Why would we always be, and this is, by the way, the press, it's amazing. We're going to talk after the next break about this last part, which is the Gaza Strip and Ariel Sharon's life and his big mistake there. But why would we ever think that the people surrounding them would change their ways? It hasn't happened it's not just 1948. It's going on for as long as it's been going on. This animosity it's not going to change tomorrow morning. And so I've been a great believer that when people know that they're strong and that we're strong with them, that there's less likely chance of a war. When we're weak, like we are today, when America projects weakness with no foreign policy, then there's much more likelihood of a war. And guess what? Look at Syria today. Look what happened. Look what's happened under President Obama. Whether you like him or don't like him, look at the facts. Between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and John Kerry now, the whole place is in disarray. Nobody knows who their allies are. Nobody knows who their enemies are. We should know. Steve Laffey's Fixing America, at LaffeyRadio.com. We appreciate you listening. We'll be back for one more second. We'll take up the Gaza Strip and modern-day politics in Israel.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood, and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm 1 out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Well, this is interesting. Israel is planning to give a special award to President Obama. When the president visits Israel next month, he'll get the award. He'll become the first sitting U.S. president to receive Israel's Presidential Medal of Distinction. It is particularly curious since he snubbed Prime Minister Netanyahu last fall when he was in the United States, and President Obama did not visit the ally during his first term as our president. President Obama's relationship also with Israel has been noted as being chilly. So what is going on here?
And not to fault, Greg, Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America at LaffeyRadio.com, broadcasting every day on the important issues of our time. And one of the important ones is the Middle East and Israel, and how we got to where we are. But that just we've been talking about Ariel Sharon, who passed away last week, and with his passing, and effectively coma in 2006, there's been a rapid change in the attitude of Israel. And I think that clip. I mean, she's asking the question. And then she even asked, we're going to play a quick clip here. She's asking former Congressman Alan West what he thinks about it. Very direct question. See if you can hear an answer in modern day politics.
Former Congressman Alan West joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you doing, Greta?
Very well. I would say Israel can decide who it wants to give a particular award to, but I'm curious your thoughts on President Obama getting this award.
Well, I do find it somewhat interesting when, as you just talked about, this is the first time that President Obama has gone to visit Israel. In his first term, he bypassed Israel. He went to Cairo, Egypt. He went to Istanbul, and he also went to Saudi Arabia. And most importantly, when you look at the neighborhood now that Israel is surrounded by, we have seen the United States government, the Obama administration, support a Muslim Brotherhood coming to power in Egypt, as well as now we're going to provide them modern F-16s as well as M1 tanks. We see the nominee for Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, Senator Hagel, who has made some very questionable comments related to Israel. As well, you see the CIA nominee, Mr. John Brennan, has referred to Israel's capital, Jerusalem, as as Al-Quds, which is what the radical Islamists refer to it as. So when you think about the foreign policy and you think about the environment in which Israel finds itself, Hezbollah and Hamas are stronger, the chaos in Syria, the expansion of the regional hegemonic dominance of Iran, that causes you a lot of concern. But of course, this is coming from President Shimon Peres and not from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
So the question is, this is like a pet peeve of mine. The question is, why do you think that they're giving him an award? Why do you think the state of Israel is giving President Obama an award? Greta won't say so because she thinks it's curious. And the answer is, of course, that it's interesting, and then a long recital of interesting things. But it's not an answer. The answer is clearly that Israel is not operating under Ariel Sharon's, we're going to take out the nuclear reactor and we're going to ask questions later, or as the planes go that way, we'll let America know, and hopefully they won't shoot them down themselves. No, the thing is, the mentality now of the people who run the country, and I'm a great admirer of Benjamin Netanyahu, but in many respects, but their mentality is, we better get the President of the United States on our side. What will the President of the United States think? What will they do about this? What's going to happen at the UN? Rather than this nuclear material that they're building to build their own bomb in Iran will almost certainly be used in some way, shape, or form to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So if Sharon was alive and in his 20s, and this was a younger day, they would have taken action. And so that's the answer. They're trying to placate the President of the United States by giving him an award, even though he deserves none. There's no medal of anything that Israel should be given to Barack Obama when he doesn't even meet with the President of Israel in public when Netanyahu went over to the White House. He kept him in the back like a servant, and then he went out and told him to get some lunch. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. That's what happened. So this is a colossal mistake by Israel to give him a medal, but their mentality has changed, and that's what I think provides more danger for the security of Israel and more danger to the Middle East. In fact, we have here Israeli Defense Minister says John Kerry should take Nobel Prize and leave us alone. He made, he actually spoke out about this, about John Kerry, and he says Kerry can't teach me anything about the conflict of the Palestinians. Of course, he had to apologize within 24 hours. They had him apologize. But these are things there's a breakdown now in U.S.-Israeli relations. Part of the fault is Israeli fault because we're not standing up and doing some things that they need to get done. And much of the fault is simply our fault. Look at the total disarray. When people don't know where they stand, whether it's your children or whether it's in foreign policy, when people don't know the players and where we stand and what we will do, disarray, and there's a higher risk of war then. Take a look back. That's how wars start. Now, there are wars going on, we'll call them civil wars within Syria and so forth. But by the way, I want to get back, because we're going to run out of time. I want to get back to a couple things. First, the PLO's phased plan. There were 3 parts to it. We talked about, this is after 74. And this is why, unless there's a total, people renounce the phase plan in these different countries, their plan is simply this. Number 1, through an armed struggle, establish an independent combatant national authority over any territory that is liberated from Israeli rule. 2, continue the struggle against Israel using the territory of the national authority as a base of operations. 3, to provoke an all-out war which Israel's Arab neighbors destroy it entirely. Quote, liberate all Palestinian territory. That's their plan. And they have a 10-point plan to enact that plan. And it goes on. I'm going to run out of time. I won't read it to you. Until that is renounced. And it won't be. What is the point of everybody? What is the point of Kerry going back and forth 10 times in a plane? Why not just help Israel be strong and project strength and keep the adversaries in disarray? That's a strategy. That's a plan. We go back to the Gaza Strip because we're going to run out of time. And just before the Gaza Strip, looking at Ariel Sharon's life as it pertains to Israel and where we are today, and we've shown you the differences that have happened, not just upon his stroke in 2006, but over the last 10 years or so. Because once he got to be, remember, it's 2000. He's been doing this since 1940-something. So effectively, he's been doing this for 50-some-odd years, fighting and fighting. he gets to be the prime minister. How does he get to be the prime minister? There's a peace plan going on between Arafat, who's still alive, and you've got the prime minister, the existing prime minister, who's showing a lot of weakness in Israel, and the meeting over there with Clinton. And after this is over, where Sharon can't take it any longer, he goes to visit the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, if you don't know, was important to 4 religions, even the Roman religion, as I remember. But to the Muslims, I don't follow that. I don't know why. Not saying I do. To the Israelis and to the Christians, it's where Jesus, a week before he was crucified or so, turned over the tables and went after the money lenders and so forth. So it's very important to a lot of religions. It's right in Jerusalem. And the argument back over then was that the prime minister, the existing prime minister before Ariel Sharon, was willing to give up half of Jerusalem. And in fact, it went back and forth of whether they were willing to give up the Temple Mount or to get it back or whatever it would be. And that was Yasser Arafat would not give on that. He couldn't give on that, he thought. And so, of course, there was no peace agreement. And even if they could, there was never a time where Yasser Arafat wanted peace. He made his money off war. He made his money off everybody fighting. That's how he made his money. He made a lot of money. So he becomes the prime minister. And what goes on is the last point I want to make is that, and this is a natural state of affairs, but shouldn't happen. I believe that in many ways, Ariel Sharon, been fighting all these years. He gets to be a pretty old guy, and he decides to basically disengage. It's called the disengagement plan. He decides to disengage from the Gaza Strip, that slender piece of land, and all the people thought, the reporters, this is great and so forth. And Ariel Sharon made a classic mistake in thinking that, one, it would make his country more secure. Israel needs to have as much land, in my opinion, as possible to keep its security and to have the best chance to protect its people. The most land it can have. Now, I'm not talking about invading other countries willy-nilly, but they've gotten more land, and it takes time. It's just basic battlefield stuff, and I'm not a soldier, but it takes time to get people and missiles from one place to the other, and you can see them coming. So he thought also, and many people thought, there's one article here from the Wall Street Journal where a guy admits he's wrong, very smart guy, Brett Stevens, who I guess was covering it. And his error, he says, was to confuse a good argument with good policy. But the illusion was that somehow several things could be shown. One, we'll find out once and for all whether the Palestinians want peace, and if they want to create a stable democracy, and whether or not they want to grow the economy like again, we in America think everybody wants to. 6 months later, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. There's been nothing but rockets coming in from that country, killing people and terrorizing Israel. The scenes of all the Jewish people who had to leave, and flower shops and businesses being totally destroyed, should set that aside forever. And there should be no illusion as to what the Palestinians would do. The Palestinians remain in abject poverty, maybe the third poorest. I had it over here. Just came out. Third poorest region in the third poorest country or area in the Arab region. They've done nothing but terror, nothing but less security for Israel. And do you think that after this was over, that in the United Nations, that Israel's Arabs thanked them? Was there a scene that you could put up where they're shaking hands? Has Israel gotten one notch higher in the world's press as far as being mentioned as a free country, which it is? Has anything good happened because they left the Gaza Strip? I mean, the number of rockets coming in over just the next period of time went from 200 to thousands. Yeah, to 1,777. Put it simply, Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza yielded less security, greater diplomatic isolation, and a Palestinian regime even more radical and emboldened than it had been before. As a strategic failure goes, it was near perfect. And it was. We're done for the day. God bless you. Tune in tomorrow for Steve Laffey's Fixing America.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.